Hey everybody. Just wanted to touch base with you again, like we did last week, and use this kind of Zoom recorded lecture to kind of fill in some of the gaps that my in-class face-to-face are getting with this next unit. So in a few minutes here, I'm going to talk to you about the stuff we're going to do for week 8 and try to replicate as much as I can the part of the instruction that really you won't get simply by reading the materials. Before I do, though, I do want to add a final note on something that developed with the platoon assignment. And if you remember the analytical method that I shared with you last week, and where I talked to you about the need to slow things down and really kind of pay attention to details in a thing that you're analyzing. And when you think you're done, take a break, come back and do it some more. And just kind of a visualization of something that happened that really illustrates the reason you want to do that. So last week with one of my face-to-faces, I showed them the film. And again, ballpark, as much as I can tell, because there's a point at which you don't know to count, because you don't know you're going to grow up to be a professor and use this film. But as best as I can tell, this would have been the 208th time I've seen Platoon. No joke. It's at least that number, if not more. And so in this last class, time number 208, I saw a detail I hadn't seen before. Okay. And the detail is that by the end of the film, Chris Taylor, the Charlie Sheen character, the one that's the central protagonist of the film, is smoking a cigarette exactly the way Barnes does. Okay. All the characters are smoking the way, everyone smokes this kind of method. But Barnes, throughout the whole film, is smoking like this, holding the cigarette cupped in his hand to provide this part of the hand hiding the embers. And that's something soldiers are trained to do so they don't, give away their position, particularly at night, obviously. By the end of the film, Chris Taylor's smoking a cigarette the same way. He doesn't start that way, but he's there by the end of the film. And you might say, well, what does that matter? Well, if you remember, I make the argument in the last lecture that Barnes wins the struggle for Chris's soul by the end of the film. And I gave you four pieces of evidence grounded in the film. I would argue this provides me with a fifth. Another way that just through behavior and visual cues, Taylor is acting like Barnes by the end of the film. So again, if that was the only piece of evidence, it's really not worth much. It's just a detail. But when you combine it to the other details I talked about last week, it kind of strengthens that argument. And that's why it's important to slow things down and go back and look for details as much as you can, even when you're tired of doing it. And that's why I say take a break and come back to it later. Because, obviously even 208 times in, it's still possible to see stuff you didn't see. So enough on that. Let's get to today's stuff, this week's stuff. So one of the things I wanted you to do is I posted 4 poems on our content page. And again, we're not going to go too far down this road because it's not a literature class, but I think these poems lend themselves well to the skills we're going to use in this next exercise. We did analysis last week. Now we're doing compare and contrast, which is a nice skill to add on top of analysis. It's like the next thing to kind of layer. We started with summary, response, synthesis, then analysis, and now we're layering the ideas of comparing and contrasting. Comparison, what the hell? I just made up a word. You guys just witnessed me make up a word. Share it with your friends. Compare and contrast is something that you can do after you do analysis of a thing. You can then make evaluative kind of comparisons to other things, or look at how this thing differs from other things. And so that's what this week's all about. So I'm going to take you real quickly through the poems. Hopefully you've read them. If you follow the order I put on content, you've read the poems once at least already before I'm here to talk about them. So I'm going to take you through the poems one by one real quickly. And then I'm going to talk about the kind of things we want to gather from the 4 poems as a group. So that's kind of what we're going to do first. So to that end, let me call up the first one. And I'm going to start with the Baudelaire poem, which is entitled Be Drunk. Great kind of deceptive title in a lot of ways, but a really fun kind of poem. Okay, You have to be, oh, I just lost it. There we go. You have to be always drunk. That's all there is to it. It's the only way. So as not to feel the horrible burden of time that breaks your back and bends you to the earth, you have to be continually drunk. But on what? Wine, poetry, or virtue, as you wish, but be drunk. And if sometimes on the steps of a palace or on the green grass of a ditch, in the mournful solitude of your own room, you wake again, drunkenness already diminishing or gone. Ask the wind, the wave, the star, the bird, the clock, everything that is flying, everything that is groaning, everything that is rolling, everything that is singing, everything that is speaking. Ask what time it is. And wind, wave, star, bird, clock will answer you. It's time to be drunk. So as not to be the martyred slaves of time, be drunk. Be continually drunk on wine, on poetry, or on virtue, as you wish. Okay, so obviously what he's using the idea of being drunk as an analogy, as a metaphor. He's not literally talking about being drunk, although that is certainly one of the options he gives the audience, right? You can be drunk on wine, but you can also be drunk on these other things. So again, it's not literally being hammered. It's using drunk as an analogy. And the analogy is to be focused, be caught in the moment. Okay, that's what we all want to do. We want to be caught in this moment and not worry about the other things that he brings up as problems, as things to be avoided, the reasons you want to be drunk, such as not to feel the horrible burden of time. Okay, that's something we're going to talk a lot about, this idea of burden of time. You're going to see that again and again in the 4 poems I've given you. The burden of time that breaks your back, breaks your will. You don't want to be martyred slaves of time. Okay, so those are the kind of ideas that I just want to call your immediate attention to. There's a lot of other things we could talk about, obviously. This was a literature class. And Charles Baudelaire is a wonderful kind of French poet, well worthy of study. But that's enough for right now. Again, I want to make this short and sweet so you can spend more of your time reading and thinking about these things on your own. So if we quickly go to the poem, To the Virgins to Make Much of Time, what we're going to see here is something rather similar. Okay, the poem begins with an injunction from the persona, to gather ye rosebuds while ye may. And the reason and again, obviously the title makes clear he's addressing these young women. Okay, and our persona is clearly a much older man. And that's one of the things I think our poems have in common, is we always have this persona in a position of advice giver. Okay, and here again, the advice is very similar. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Okay, old time is still a flying. Again, the idea of time being the issue, like we saw in the first poem. And the same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. Okay, the idea, again, you seize something today, don't put it off until tomorrow, because you don't know that it will exist. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. That age is best which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent the worst and worst, time still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may, go marry. For having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. And one of the reasons I chose this, it's one of the more famous kind of Carpe Diem poems, but it's usually taught with a couple others you may or may not have come across, or that you may come across in the future. Poems, when someone says Carpe Diem poems, they usually think of Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress, or this poem, or John Donne's The Flea. And what you'll see with a lot of Carpe Diem poems is that they'll use the rationale of focus on the moment, live in the moment, because the persona is trying to get the woman into bed, right? It's a fairly disingenuous kind of pickup line. But here, we have a much older kind of persona who's not necessarily trying to do that. He's not trying to gain anything from the advice, because again, his advice is not don't sleep with me. His advice is to go get married. Okay, go find love and embrace love and make love the center of your life, kind of thing. Because if you miss it or you wait too long for it, you might get stuck. It's like it's a game of love that's like musical chairs. If you wait till the music stops, there may not be a chair for you. So you want to grab it while you can. Okay, I'm gonna leave that there for a second and move on to another just absolutely beautiful poem. This is a song at the end of the world. And here Milos is doing something very similar, although here, again, we have the persona in the position of advice giver, although it's a little more subtle than the previous two. But what we have here is just a kind of poetic snapshot of a particular day. And the title tells us this is the day the world ends, but it's really interesting to kind of focus on the activities that are happening on this day. On the day the world ends, a bee circles a clover. A fisherman mends a glimmering net. Happy porpoises jump in the sea. By the rain spout, young sparrows are playing, and the snake is gold-skinned, as it should always be. On the day the world ends, women walk through the fields under their umbrellas. A drunkard grows sleepy at the edge of a lawn. Vegetable peddlers shout in the street, and a yellow-sailed boat comes nearer the island. The voice of a violin lasts in the air and leads into a starry night. So we'll pause there for a second. And what you're seeing is these first two stanzas is it's an absolutely normal day. And that's the point, right? You can't predict within the world of poem or the position of the persona, the advice givers, there's not going to be announcements on the day of the world ends, whether it's literally the whole world ending or your world ending because you're dying. You don't necessarily know in advance. It's not scheduled. It's not predicted. It's going to look like every other day. Okay? And those who expected lightning and thunder are disappointed. And those who expected signs and archangels' trumps do not believe it is happening now. As long as the sun and moon are above, as long as the bumblebee visits a rose, as long as rosy infants are born, no one believes it is happening now. Only a white-haired old man who would be a prophet, yet is not a prophet, for he's much too busy, repeats while he binds his tomatoes, no other end of the world will there be. No other end of the world there will be. So here again, the message is the same, it's just more subtle, right? By showing you what the last day of the world looks like and how it looks like every day. The persona is making a point saying, since you never know what's coming, you should treat every day like this is it, and do the things you want to get done. And we'll look at one last expression of this idea in one of my favorite poems of all time. This is Walt Whitman. It's just amazing. This is "Oh Me, Oh Life." And it goes, "Oh me, oh life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, of myself forever reproaching myself, for who more foolish than I, and who more faithless? Of eyes that vainly crave the light, of the objects mean, of the struggle ever renewed, of the poor results of all, of the plotting and sordid crowds I see around me, of the empty and useless years of the rest with the rest me intertwined, the question, oh me, so sad, recurring." Right? And all this is gearing up to what is that question? And then finally he gives us the question, what good amid these, oh me, oh life? What's the point? Why bother? In a world that is just perpetually heavy and laden with responsibilities and crap and bad things, why care? Why bother? It's a pretty profound question. It's a question, the last couple of years, it's been really easy to ask, right? With all the kind of horrors of 2020, and when it's continued in 2021, there's a lot of really, really hard, heavy things happening. So I think this is a poem that, particularly in our moment, we can relate to kind of the anguish of Whitman's persona. But he doesn't just ask a question, fortunately, he provides an answer. And the answer is literally identified as answer, so you don't miss it. The answer is that you are here, that life exists, an identity. Just an amazing last line. That the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. And if the question that would follow, the question I would ask you then is, okay, well, what will your verse be? So again, the idea of focus on this today, the opportunities that you have today. And I kind of anticipated where we're going with all this earlier when I talked about these are poems that are known collectively as Carpe Diem poems. Carpe Diem, Latin for seize the day. And I've given you a nice little pretty short article on poets.org about Carpe Diem poems, and the selections we've read are referenced there, as well as a bunch of other Carpe Diem poems are included, and I certainly invite you to bounce around if you were interested in poetry, and if you're not, maybe this is something that will get you interested in poetry. And when you have some free time, bounce around, read some of these other poems that are either referenced or linked, because at the bottom they have just a list of other poems that are linked that you can go read. But what you gather from reading this essay and hopefully looking at the 4 I gave you are some basic kind of common themes. The idea of living life to its full potential, given the fleeting nature of life itself. That's an idea you see all these poems kind of embrace or give voice to. Recognizing the power of each moment. That's something we've talked about in each of the 4s we went through. And finally, to value possibilities for as long as possibility exists. Okay, that kind of idea you see foregrounded in all 4 of these selections and in the other ones linked on the article. So a fair question for you is like, yeah, hey, that's great, that's fine, that's nice, Paul. Thanks for donning your ugly toucan shirt and sitting and talking to us for a little while about poems in a class that's not a literature class. That was really fascinating. Thanks. I want the last 17 minutes of my life back. Why are we doing this? Well, I think it's interesting if you take these poems collectively, and again, I gave you 4, but if you want to take all the poems that are kind of identified as Carpe Diem poems, and you put them over here, say these are writing assignment 4 kind of stuff. Okay, we've analyzed these things. Then I threw something a little off, something that doesn't seem to fit at you. And that is the Eminem rap song, Lose Yourself. And I provided not only the video, and again, just adult theme kind of college announcement. Obviously there are, if you're not familiar with Eminem, there's explicit language. Yeah, but so just be forewarned before you listen to the video that you're going to hear this. And I've also provided the lyrics, so you can have the lyrics in front of you as you're watching. Just as watching and listening to the song, you can have the visual while you're listening to it. What's interesting is if you go ahead and follow through the Eminem song, what you're going to see is a lot of similarities to the stuff we talked about. Okay, starting with his voiceover before the song proper begins, you have Eminem speaking, saying, look, if you had one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted, in one moment, would you capture it or just let it slip? And there we see that idea of embracing the value of possibility. While possibility exists, we see the idea of the power of each moment. We see all of those kind of things that we identified as Carpe Diem poems are in this rap song. And these are things that on the surface don't seem to meet or match. No one would say, hey, name me the great poets of Western civilization. We're going to go really far down the list before someone says Eminem. Again, I'm not slamming Eminem. I'm just saying people aren't recognizing that this is a connection that can easily be made if you just take the time and look at it. So as you go through the song, and again, I'm not going to read the whole entire song to you, all the lyrics, but you're going to see a lot of the things we already talked about, right? We're going to see how the persona in the song is weighed down by the daily grind, his daily life experiences, being a single father, working 9 to 5 jobs and not being able to make ends meet, flirting with poverty, living in a trailer home, all the things that are kind of in the way of the kind of stardom or immortality he wants as a singer. Scroll down here so I can get some of the lines in front of me. And the song is about him kind of dealing with those issues. And the refrain, if you harken back to last week where I talked about, one of the kinds of details that are really important are repetitions. So whenever you're looking at a song, obviously the most important part of any song is the chorus. So that's the part that's repeated. So when you do that, you go to the chorus of this song, which is as follows. You better lose yourself in the music. The moment you own it, you better never let it go. I should rap it. That would be kind of funny, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to speak it. You can pretend what it would be like if I was rapping. It wouldn't be pleasant for anybody. You only get one shot. And here's, I think, is the key part that I want to focus on within the chorus. You only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. Opportunity comes once in a lifetime. Okay. What is Eminem saying there? Well, he's saying the same things we heard Whitman say and Herrick say, and all of these Carpe Diem poems that are celebrated and included in intro to lit anthologies. You go to the Norton Anthology of Poetry. All these guys we just talked about are in there. You go to the Norton Anthology of British Lit or American Lit, they're in there. Eminem's not. Which, when you consider the value of Carpe Diem poems, as your article will make clear to you, these go all the way back to ancient Rome. This kind of poetic kind of theme and style. And we see Eminem being part of that long process and chain of this kind of poetic style. So we can easily make a comparison paper looking at how Eminem's rap song is continuing very clearly in the tradition of, this several thousand-year-old poetic tradition of Carpe Diem poems. Obviously, there are differences, and that's where the contrast part comes in. Rap music is on its surface rather different than poems. Although, again, I say on its surface because all songs are in essence poems. In fact, early poems were sung, kind of just blurring those lines even more. But, I don't think on the surface, I think a lot of people would kind of dismiss the idea of rap as poetry, but that's a rather knee-jerk reaction. I mean, it's doing the same things as poetry, which is giving voice to kind of the internal struggles of what it means to be human. It just, in rap, it tends to be focused more on inner city issues and experiences in life, but it's still dealing with the kind of essence of being human within that environment. So I think we can obviously see that Eminem song is continuing this transition and tradition. So that was a real quick example of kind of the things we want to do and think about when we're dealing with comparison contrast papers. Which brings me to your fifth writing assignment. Okay, I gotta move myself over here so I have it in front of me. Again, this is now available on our content page for week 8. And the first part of the assignment is just a review of kind of the things I just talked about and the things you read and the connections hopefully you are making. And like I did with Platoon, this is an example of what I want you to do. And now here are kind of the guidelines. So what I want you to do is choose a song or a film that takes a different approach to the theme you identified in the 4th writing assignment. So whatever you picked for writing assignment 4, if it was a song, pick another song. If it was a film, pick another film. If it was a painting, pick another painting. And I want you to find something that has some of the same themes, but takes a different approach. And I want you to write up a short, same kind of length as all the other writing assignments, 1 to 2 pages. comparing and contrasting the ways those two items address that theme. Yeah, I think that's the more fun option. But in case that brings you to a dead end, I've also provided you with a couple other options that will develop the same skill in a slightly different way. So if that doesn't work for you, you can choose option one. The first option I'm offering instead is the prompt on page 263 of your textbook, and it gives you a whole bunch of different kind of questions, asking you to compare and contrast, work life, work experience, home life, school, those kind of things. And each of those categories has like 4 or 5 different kind of questions that can guide your response. Pick one of them. Don't do all. I mean, it'll just be a disaster, and you'll be working much harder than you need to. So I meant just, of the 15 or whatever many questions are in that prompt, just pick one that kind of clicks for you. If that doesn't work, you can go to either prompt on page 264. There are 2 other prompts that are dealing with compare and contrast. So that gives you 4 options, right? To address this kind of new skill we want to work on. And again, just a reminder of what we're doing for the whole class as a whole is each of these assignments is trying to work on a particular skill at a time. And then when we get later in the semester and you get the chance to write a full complete paper, you'll be grabbing from these skills you've been working on in these smaller writing assignments. And in some cases, using the writing assignment as kind of a first draft for the paper, but more on that later. As always, I'm available for questions. This assignment, by the way, is due on the last day before we leave for our fall break. So I won't be doing another one of these till after. So I hope you all have a fun and rewarding and relaxing and recharging fall break. I myself, I'm headed to New Mexico to kind of go down into Carlsbad Caverns once again. Something I like to do a couple times a year. But I hope you're doing something that will equally give you a few days of peace. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about anything I talked about or any of the readings or this assignment, make sure you just give me a holler. And failing that, I'll see you guys on the flip side from break. All right, y'all take it easy.